Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time. And today, we're plunging deep into a book that really forces us to reckon with the brutal architectures of survival. It's Paul Lynch's searing debut novel, Red Sky and Morning.
It is. And I'll say, this is not a pleasant story. It's tough, but it's an essential one.
Absolutely essential, especially if you tend to view, great migrations through this comfortable but maybe narrow lens of individual choice.
That's precisely the systemic frame we need to get into, and it's really the core crisis this novel addresses.
How so?
Well, if you watch the news or read history,
Yeah.
when we talk about human mobility, whether it's the Irish famine or, contemporary refugee crises, the narrative is so often reduced to personal tragedy.
Right, it's about one person's moral choices or their heroic escape.
Exactly. We focus so intently on the individual suffering that we inadvertently miss the massive, overwhelming systemic forces that made that individual's movement an absolute inescapable necessity.
We always seem to ask, why did they leave? As if the answer is just a simple decision.
A moment of personal agency where someone chooses to seek a better life.
But what if that whole frame is just fundamentally misleading? What if the more accurate and frankly more frightening question is, what crushing force expelled them?
And in this novel, Paul Lynch shows that those forces are not just bad luck or a single bad landlord. They are integrated global systems.
Things like economic coercion, state violence.
State violence backed by this whole ideological justification and the cold calculation of imperial expansion that just requires disposable labor.
And this is where the power of historical fiction, especially Lynch's really sparse lyrical prose, just shines.
It has to. I mean, dry statistics, the number of dead in the famine, the poverty rates, the speed of railroad construction, they can quantify the tragedy, sure.
But they can't make you feel it.
They can't convey the emotional, the visceral truth of power and violence. So Lynch takes the story of one man, Coll Coyle, fleeing Donegal in 1832, and uses his terrifying journey to illuminate these huge systemic mechanisms.
Mechanisms that operate really completely independently of individual morality or heroism.
Exactly.
So our mission in this deep dive is to look at Coll Coyle's journey to the New World, not as an adventure or some hopeful escape, it is definitely not that, but as this inescapable process.
Survival, displacement, and coercion all operating as interconnected systems.
We're looking for the architectural plans of these systems because they're the true and often invisible protagonists of the book. They're determining Coyle's fate long before he ever even steps onto that ship. So before we get deeper into Coyle's forced flight, let's maybe contextualize the writer and the work a bit.
I did, yeah.
Paul Lynch is a widely acclaimed Irish novelist and critic. Red Sky and Morning was his debut, though, published back in 2013.
And it immediately announced a major new voice. The novelist Colin McCann, I remember, said he had a sensational gift for a sentence.
And you feel that on every page. But that style isn't an accident, is it?
No, not at all. Lynch has a serious background as a film critic.
Yeah.
And he's been very open about the heavy influence of cinema on his work.
Who does he cite?
Specifically, he talks about the dispassionate, objective, spiritual style of filmmaking you see in people like Robert Bresson.
Okay.
But he couples that with the literary muscularity and sort of mythic stature you find in writers like Cormac McCarthy.
And that's not just trivia. You're saying this actually informs how the novel functions?
It's central to it. I mean, when you read the book, the prose is noticeably sparse, right?
Very sparse. The dialogue is minimal, almost skeletal. It often seems to skip over any internal psychological reflection.
Precisely. And that sparse objective style is a systemic tool. If you remove the extensive internal monologue, the deep dives into Coyle's thoughts and motivations, you force the reader to focus entirely on the external forces.
The harsh landscape, the unyielding action of the chase.
The physical degradation of his body, and the relentless pressure of the system. It strips away the comfort of sentimentality. It stops you from getting lost in individual drama.
So instead, you're just confronted with the unavoidable nature of the events.
Yes. Lynch talks about wanting his writing to operate on the realm of historical myth rather than historical detail, which lets him search out these broader, more universal truths about power.
And yet, those mythic truths are rooted in a profoundly specific and tragic historical reality. The novel starts in Donegal, 1832, focused on Irish displacement. But Lynch didn't start the project in Ireland, did he?
No, he started it in America, with a startling discovery about forgotten labor.
Duffy's Cut.
He started specifically with the history of Duffy's Cut in Pennsylvania. This is the inciting historical reality behind the entire novel.
Tell us about that.
Well, the novel draws heavily on this true tragic event in 1832, where 57 Irish laborers were hired by an Irish contractor, a man named Duffy, to level land for a new rail line.
Part of the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad expansion.
That's the one. And the outcome was just
A
catastrophic.
total disaster.
It was. Within weeks of starting the work, all 57 of those men were dead.
From what?
A combination of disease, exhaustion, and potentially violence, compounded by just appalling conditions.
Yeah.
And their bodies were secretly buried right there on the worksite.
A deliberate act of historical erasure.
In the starkest terms, they were, as Lynch himself put it, wiped off the face of the earth as if they never existed.
And that phrase, that wiping away of lives, is what took hold of him, wasn't it? He knew the area these men came from in Donegal.
He did. So the entire novel becomes an act of refusal. It refuses the erasure attempted by the system. It gives voice and context and a personal, terrifying trajectory to those anonymous dead.
So the protagonist, Coll Coyle, he's a composite of every man who was discarded for the sake of industrial progress.
Exactly. By embedding Coyle's personal flight within this specific historical tragedy, Lynch ensures that his objective, cinematic style serves its crucial systemic function. We see the historical necessity of the suffering.
It's not melodrama.
No. It's the inevitable byproduct of the prevailing power structures and the demand for cheap, expendable labor for American expansion.
Okay, so let's unpack Coyle's narrative trajectory. It begins not with an open choice, but with an absolute fatal constraint.
Right. We meet him as a farmer, a family man in Donegal in 1832. His life is defined by the land he works, land he doesn't own, and this constant threat of eviction.
And the catalyst for his flight is intensely personal, but it's just saturated in class violence. Coyle kills Hamilton, the landlord's agent.
We have to linger on this catalyst because it is the systemic hinge of the entire novel.
Why is that?
Coyle's wife, Sarah, she makes it clear that they owed nothing. The land was useless to the landlord. So this wasn't a standard eviction for debt.
No.
The eviction was triggered, shockingly, by Coyle failing to doff his hat to Hamilton.
Just a simple refusal to show deference to the gentry.
That's it. This wasn't about economics. It was about the enforcement of a prescribed social and class hierarchy. Coyle's refusal of submission was seen as a challenge to the entire system of land control.
Which made his expulsion a necessary act of systemic discipline.
Exactly. That single moment, a refusal to tilt his headsets off a catastrophic, irreversible chain reaction.
He kills Hamilton, flees into the forest, and sees the system respond with terrifying speed and cruelty. His brother, Jim.
Jim was later found suspended 2 feet off the ground, hanging by his thumbs, being tortured by Fowler's men. The message could not be clearer.
Defiance, no matter how small, results in extreme collective punishment.
So Coyle's movement is emphatically not a choice for betterment. It's a forced expulsion. And the system chasing him is layered.
You've got the landlords who control the property, the capital interests,
Like Duffy, the contractor, promising the rail line.
and the enforcers or agents of empire, personified perfectly by this character, John Fowler.
And Coyle is constrained by all three.
Fowler is this supreme hunter, this unrelenting agent of the power structure. He appears almost mythologically on horseback right after Hamilton's death. And Coyle's escape to Derry, and then the ocean voyage, the transit itself, is immediately defined by systemic constraint. Let's talk about that journey.
That transit is often called the coffin ship experience. And Lynch just captures the appalling reality of the ship, the Mermaid, perfectly.
He's traveling on what is basically a freight ship.
It is. And the voyage across the Atlantic is depicted not as an adventure, but as this prolonged, brutal ordeal. A controlled environment where life is cheap and suffering is just maximized for profit.
He's sick. He's lying between fever dreams and the rancid reality of the hold, battling this profound disorientation.
The sensory details are just. They're overwhelming. Lynch immerses you in the invisible violence of the system.
You hear the groans and coughing of the sick.
The pervasive rancid sweat that sticks to the air, stale piss, and the fetor of feces. This isn't the kind of violence that leaves a visible wound. It's the slow, attritional, lethal, structural violence of disease and hunger and foul water.
The conditions are structurally lethal, and the way they manage the dead, that highlights the economics of the whole system.
It does. Coyle witnesses the sailmaster, who is described as pocked and lobster-faced, performing this grim task of mummification.
Bodies, a woman and a boy, are wrapped tightly in white sail.
Weights are tied to their ankles, and the faceless remains slid off the wood into the ocean.
The system reduces human life to disposable cargo, wrapping the dead in the very material that propels the ship towards capital expansion.
And there's a pragmatic need there, too. The bodies can't wash up and alert authorities to the true, lethal cost of this immigration traffic. That might threaten future profits for the ship owners.
So once Coyle arrives in the New World, the trajectory doesn't open up into freedom, it immediately funnels him into the next layer of the system.
The system of labor and expendability, specifically at Duffy's cut.
And Duffy, the Irish contractor, sells this seductive promise of capital, right? A fine fortune, $15 a month.
Fine canvas tents, all the whiskey a man could buy. That's the ideal.
And the reality?
The reality, as Lynch shows, is that the men work not like men, but beasts. They rise before dawn, their limbs stiff, their faces gray, invisible beneath the dust, working until the sun goes down.
They're constantly hungry and wet and exhausted.
And the deaths here are not random accidents. Structurally speaking, they are features of industrial expansion.
Lynch gives us these specific, brutal details that just etch this reality into your mind. Stamp is killed instantly when an iron tamping bar is blasted clean through his head.
Ruddy is crushed by a boulder in a tunnel. And beyond the trauma of the rockwork, they're afflicted by cholera and fever.
Causing violent voiding, rapid dehydration, delirium.
And the system's response is one of pure, cynical pragmatism. It's all driven by the profit motive.
The dead are buried quickly, anonymously.
With space left beside them, just in case more follow. There's no ceremony, no rest. Duffy's decree is brutally clear. You can do whatever you like after dark, but it's back to business tomorrow.
Labor is disposable. It's replaceable.
It's expected to work until total failure or death. This is the structural function of indentured or contract labor at the bottom of the industrial hierarchy.
And the systemic constraint continues because the agent of coercion, John Fowler, isn't just in Ireland, he is transcontinental.
He is the physical embodiment of the system's insistence on getting its due. He embodies pursuit and inevitability itself.
He crosses the ocean, tracks Coyle to Philadelphia, follows him deep into the American countryside.
Which means survival in this novel isn't treated as an act of heroism or triumph. It's endurance. Endurance within a rigid, inescapable system.
Coyle is constantly fleeing, sick, vulnerable. We see him hiding in cold chicken coops, losing the pony he stole.
Surviving only through these fleeting, essential acts of kindness from strangers like the cutter.
And all the while, Fowler represents the inescapable logic of the power structure. Disobedience will be punished, even if the cost of the chase outweighs the value of the man.
It's a lesson in control.
Let's pull back now and really map the architecture of this pervasive systemic violence. If we look at the actors in the novel, they function almost like different organs within a single global industrial body.
That's a good way to put it. We can categorize them by their relationship to power and capital extraction. First, you have the enforcers and controllers.
So, landlords like Hamilton, who kick the whole thing off by enforcing the class hierarchy, and John Fowler, who is the supreme hunter and ideological muscle.
Right. And Fowler's men, Mackin and Gillen, are the blunt instruments who carry out the physical violence.
Then there's this crucial middle layer, the labor brokers and capital agents.
This is where we find Duffy, the contractor who secures the cheap labor, and his deputy Doyle, who oversees the work.
And what's fascinating here, and you see this so often in systems of exploitation, is the complicity. Duffy is Irish. He's exploiting his own countrymen.
He's selling them the myth of American prosperity while maximizing their misery for his own profit. He's in that strange middle ground where he is both a victim of the overarching capital structure and a perpetrator of localized brutality.
Absolutely. The labor broker is the necessary intermediary who kind of sanitizes the process for the distant railroad investors.
Definitely. And finally, you have the exploited, which includes the vulnerable migrants like Coyle, his friend the cutter, and the dozens of anonymous dead Irishmen at Duffy's cut.
They are the human fuel for the industrial engine. They're literally being built into the infrastructure.
And the incentives driving the system are just crystal clear. It's about profit extraction Duffy, maximizing the work for that minimum promise of $15 a month.
It's about land control Hamilton's eviction over a hat, ensuring the dominance of the landowning class.
And of course, industrial expansion, the rail line itself, which needs a cut to be blasted through rock and laid over dead bodies.
But to justify this violence and exploitation, the system needs a potent, dehumanizing narrative.
And this is where Fowler stops being just a hunter and becomes the system's ideological voice. He doesn't just chase Coyle, He pontificates on the disposability of the oppressed.
He provides the intellectual and historical justification for the state violence he enacts.
You hear this so chillingly when he's speaking to Ranty, a man he meets. He's talking about the Irish. Fowler claims the Irish never founded a town or founded a road.
He says the Danes and Normans had to come and cut down their forests and build Dublin, Wexford, Limerick.
It's textbook colonial historical revisionism used to justify present cruelty. He goes on, he tells Ranty the Irish were just standing about in the rain up to your oxters and cow shit.
Up to your armpits and cow shit.
Huddling in your dank forests, stealing each other's cows, then murdering each other for it. And then he concludes, it's not what you would call civilization, is it, old man? No, I think not.
So by framing the Irish as historically stagnant, incompetent, and dirty, he justifies the violence by claiming they need guidance and control.
It's a narrative that turns victimhood into an inherent flaw.
And crucially, this narrative gets adopted by others in the system. Later, Duffy echoes this when he calls the dying laborers at the cut a pack of diseased dogs.
Yes, when he's instructing the local militia, the horse company, to chase them away.
Yeah.
Once you strip people of their humanity through narrative, their suffering isn't just justified, it becomes necessary for advancement, for the great rail line that will supposedly civilize the wilderness.
Which brings us to the core realization that this kind of structural harm persists without a single villain. Fowler is brutally violent, yes, but the system ensures violence persists even when he's not there or when he's injured. The greatest violence Coyle faces is structured by economic necessity.
And we see this devastating feedback loop operating across two continents. It starts with poverty and control in Ireland,
which forces flight, the dehumanizing coffin ship transit,
which leads to exploitation at Duffy's Cut, the broken promise of fair labor,
and culminates in erasure. Through disease, accidents, secret burial, Coyle just cycles seamlessly from one form of suffering to another.
And that detail of structural lethality at Duffy's Cut is key. Duffy's refusal to let men leave the sick tent for fear of contagion. He's condemning them to die in squalor without any care.
That just underscores how the profit motive is the core mechanism of structural harm.
To lose workers to sickness is a cost. To let them leave and spread contagion to the surrounding, paying workforce is a greater financial risk. Profit always outweighs basic human care.
And the final, terrifying act of this systemic erasure is the spectacle of Maurice's body.
Horrific. Dragged back to the cut, noosed around the neck, scratched and beaten. Used as a stark, visceral warning to any man who thinks about escaping the labor contract.
The system kills, exploits, and then it weaponizes the dead to terrorize the living into submission.
Yeah.
Reading Coyle's story, it is just impossible to see this as purely historical. These 19th century patterns of displacement and exploitation, they echo so profoundly today.
They do. This novel acts as a necessary key for unlocking modern migration narratives. It forces you to ask, where do we see the same invisible systems at work right now?
And the primary shift in perception required is moving the focus away from an individual's, say, lack of preparedness or personal failings,
and onto the overwhelming systemic pressure. The novel establishes that Coyle didn't wake up and choose to migrate for some abstract idea of betterment. He was expelled. He was expelled by lethal economic and class violence. He was fleeing a death sentence over a hat.
Which mirrors global discussions today. Whether the driver is a climate disaster causing crop failure, or persistent regional conflicts, or deep economic collapse.
People are not moving because they decided to be adventurous. They are moving because the system they are trapped within has become absolutely lethal or has just ceased to function. Their mobility is coerced.
And you see the direct connection to modern labor precarity, too.
Oh, absolutely. Duffy's Cut, promising $15 a month but delivering dangerous work, threats of withheld pay, exposure to disease and isolated conditions. It's the 19th century template.
For systems that leverage mobile populations for cheap, dirty, dangerous work all over the world.
Think of modern contract labor in fields like construction, agriculture, certain service sectors. The power imbalance leaves workers extremely vulnerable.
Their wages can be withheld, their living conditions degraded, their legal standing exploited.
And the dehumanization of these mobile populations is a persistent pattern. The treatment of the Irish laborers, who are basically expected to die for the rail line, whose lives are deemed expendable for progress.
That reflects ongoing issues globally, where mobile, often undocumented, populations are treated as less than people. They're used up, and then they're discarded when they get sick or injured.
And we come back to that chilling detail from the novel, the fear of contamination.
When the men at Duffy's Cut start getting sick with cholera or typhus, the local militia, the horse company, chases them off the work site.
They're afraid the contagion will spread to established society. And this isn't just a humanitarian failure. It underscores the structural desire of the established profiting society to isolate and ignore the direct, lethal consequences of the labor system that fuels their growth.
They want the labor.
They absolutely want the labor. They just do not want the associated human cost contaminating their clean, civilized space.
It's the ultimate attempt to make the violence invisible. Which brings us back to what we've defined as systemic or structural lethality.
The analysis of the subtle yet lethal aspects of the economic system that aren't a physical beating or a gun.
The greatest threats to Coll Coyle and the men, they aren't just Fowler's bullet?
Not at all. The most ubiquitous threat is the slow, grinding violence of disease, exhaustion, hunger, and foul water.
These are systemic threats baked into the journey and the labor contract itself.
Because minimizing costs maximizes profit. Providing clean water, adequate sanitation, rest, that all cuts into the margin.
Therefore, the economic system, driven by maximizing profit and minimizing safety, kills just as effectively and often more broadly than direct state violence.
The slow, grinding death by exhaustion and contamination is the true defining feature of the exploited immigrant experience that Lynch depicts here.
The essential crisis this novel forces us to perceive is how powerful systems actively work to erase individual human suffering in the name of progress.
Absolutely. Duffy's Cut was a secret burial. It was a deliberate attempt to erase 57 lives from the historical record of American expansion. Lynch's novel is a powerful act of testimony against that erasure.
And this need for testimony is explored so powerfully through Coyle's wife, Sarah, who is left behind in Ireland.
After Coyle leaves, Sarah begins her own search for meaning, for knowledge about his fate, even though she realizes that all you can do in this life is learn to accept loss.
Her intense need to
speaking out for the voiceless lost to that abyss. She recognizes that their individual lives, their struggles, are only a white-hot moment against the vast, indifferent expanse of geological time and history.
Testimony is the only weapon they have against the system's indifference.
And Fowler's ideology is the perfect foil for that. Fowler is the one trying to sanitize history into a narrative of inevitable progress.
He reduces the Irish to primitive squatters who just needed the advancement of the amenities of life brought by colonial and industrial forces.
And that narrative conveniently overlooks the extreme violence and the immense human cost required to build that very progress.
The railroad tracks laid over dead, anonymous bodies that Duffy and the rail company tried to keep secret.
Which reveals this classic ideological contradiction that's inherent in imperial narratives. The builders of progress, the Irish laborers who physically cut the railway line through rock, are at the same time deemed unworthy of civilization by the very enforcers of that progress, like Fowler.
The system relies on this ideological sleight of hand. The labor is essential, but the person who provides it is disposable.
And the narrative has to remain one of great advancement, not of great atrocity.
And yet, amidst this systemic nihilism, this feeling that one life doesn't matter, Coyle finds a way to assert meaning. His survival story exposes structural power not through some grand victory, but through profound moral commitment.
Even when he's at his lowest point, his commitment to human connection is the final resistance.
The final decisive moment of resistance isn't him escaping to a new life or triumphantly shooting Fowler.
No, it's when he stops running, he sits exhausted on a rock, and he realizes he can't leave a dying man.
He chooses to turn back towards the cut, knowing full well Fowler is lurking nearby.
Because he cannot abandon the cutter who showed him crucial kindness. This commitment to a moral economy of the oppressed, standing by your fellow worker, your family, that is the fragile counter-narrative to Fowler's cold, nihilistic philosophy.
The philosophy that every story is swallowed by forces greater.
Fowler claimed that every fate, every life, every story is swallowed by forces greater. But Coyle's refusal to abandon a friend, his visceral commitment to enduring the pain, his actions taken for human connection rather than self-preservation.
That's the final resistance against utter systemic despair.
And the ultimate fate of Coyle in that final dreamlike scene, it's highly ambiguous, but it is so powerfully emotional. He's shot, he's collapsing.
But in that moment, he hears his wife's voice telling him, "Lie here, my love. Lie here against the warmth of my skin."
And he lies back to sleep against the turning of the earth. So even in death, or right before it, the memory of home, connection, and family provides this brief, potent sanctuary against the system's cold indifference.
It's the final, intimate human truth that refuses to be erased by the march of progress or the historical abyss.
So what Red Sky and Morning ultimately reveals is that migration is rarely a simple journey toward opportunity. It's an urgent, calculated survival mechanism driven by overwhelming economic, class, and state forces.
Coyle's entire journey is defined by the systems that hunted him, utilized him, and then sought to discard him for the sake of profit.
And that's why fiction, especially fiction with this unflinching sensory style, is so absolutely necessary for systemic analysis.
Right. Statistics about disease rates or wage disparities, they just flatten the human experience.
But fiction allows us to fully experience the fear and the sensory details of structural lethality. The stench in the hold, the rock dust in the lungs, the exhaustion, the cracked skin, the desperation for clean water.
Details that make the structural horror real and, most importantly, unforgettable. It converts the abstract statistics back into human experience.
And we return, finally, to Fowler's fatalistic creed, the ideological anchor of the power structure he serves.
I've come to notice that whatever calculations we make in life are destroyed by accidents or agencies beyond our control.
Every fate, every life, every story swallowed by forces greater.
The novel sets this cold, calculated logic of the system against Coll Coyle's sheer, visceral commitment to enduring and eventually to returning to save his friend.
So the question left hanging for all of us, for you, is the essential, unresolved question of fate. Does Coyle's ultimate collapse prove Fowler right? That all individual commitment is meaningless against the abyss of history?
Or does his enduring love for his family, symbolized by the child's ribbon found by the cutter on the road, offer a meaningful countercalculation? Does it prove that human connection is the one thing no system can fully swallow?
That tension between systemic inevitability and moral commitment is the enduring legacy of this book.
It's a tension that is alive today in every migration crisis, every exploited labor camp, and every historical narrative that claims progress without acknowledging the bodies buried beneath its foundations. We have been exploring Red Sky and Morning by Paul Lynch. We encourage you to read the book yourself, support the author, or borrow it from your local library. For a shorter, visual overview of this topic, see the mini-explainer linked in the description. If you enjoy systems-level analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.